Will you join me in prayer? God of change, God of mystery, be with us in this time of reflection. Enter our hearts. Move us toward action. Amen. So I have to confess, as I mentioned in the sort of pastoral welcome, celebrating MLK Day always brings up a mix of emotions for me. I stand in awe of his legacy, for sure. His staggering intellect and boundless compassion, his fierce determination and vision, his ability to inspire thousands toward love. I hold reverence for him as a Christian who sought to fully live into the teachings of Jesus. What I struggle with is the ways in which he and his message are routinely minimized, sanitized, and packaged up for consumption, especially around Martin Luther King Day celebrations. There's been a tendency to use the idea of him almost as an avatar to encapsulate an era of racism that is applied as over and done with. Complete, nice, tidy. Good job, MLK. Many of us, of course, have realized slowly that that is far from the truth. And institutions for whom he would have had a stern word in his day publish platitudes and memes on MLK Day that do nothing to change their harmful practices. It can be hard to know how to celebrate and mourn this erasure of his work on the same day. Part of the struggle, I think, is that we have coalesced all of the first civil rights struggle into this one day. It's a mishmash of remembering the man and his visionary, inspiring leadership, as well as remembering the fights for equal rights, as well as a public reckoning of where we are today. It's a lot for one day. And in the midst of all the memes and quotes and speeches, I find the thing that we tend to forget is that this movement that he helped lead and inspire was a movement made up of individuals. Thousands and thousands of people made hundreds of thousands of independent, individual choices about their lives. And that changed the course of history. There were small ways that people participated, such as boycotting products that were actively harming the Black community, or sending in humble but meaningful donations to the organizations working for freedom. There were large ways that people participated, such as becoming a freedom rider at real risk of death to enable voter registration, or submitting to training in nonviolence before participating in a violent counter sit-in for desegregation. People also took small actions that carried huge risks, such as an elderly Black farmer registering to vote in his small town in Mississippi and incurring the wrath of the local KKK, or swimming in a segregated pool on a hot day, prompting the pool owner to pour acid into the water. Each of these people chose to engage in some kind of action, some kind of choice that was different than the choice they might have otherwise made. And that is what created movement. In our eagerness for a tidy story that lines up under the MLK avatar, we also tend to forget that all of these hundreds of thousands of people did not always agree with each other, with the tactics, with the actions, with how hard to press, with how much to befriend or not. We forget that the movement was made up of coalitions that sometimes worked with each other, sometimes disagreed with each other, and sometimes worked against one another. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Black Panther Party, the Congress of Racial Equality, the National Urban League, all were working on individual issues. They would occasionally work together. All of these were made up of individuals who weren't MLK, but were choosing to respond to his message, to do something. The Children's Crusade, which we talked about during the YA moment, was an example of the kinds of disagreements that cropped up. After a number of successes in the civil rights movement, it had begun to stall and feel like it was losing traction. And so engaging children was considered as a way of drawing attention and support to the cause. Both Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were opposed to this event, were opposed to this tactic, fearing the level of violence that the children would be exposed to. They urged the organizer, Reverend James Bevel of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, to change the plans and withdrew their support. Their concerns were prescient. On the first day of the march, so many children were arrested that they ran out of room. Children showed up again on the second day, and since arresting them hadn't worked and all of the holding cells were full, police instead turned dogs, fire hoses, and batons onto the children to get them to disperse. These violent images, some say, helped finally turn the tide for national civil rights legislation to be passed. On days like today, when the avatar of MLK is paraded around in neat and tidy ways around the country, especially by those who benefit from neat and tidy narratives, it is imperative that we remember the full story and join it to other movements, untidy movements of the past. Our own Christian story we heard today reminds us that it was crowds of people made up of individuals and their individual actions and choices responding to Jesus, which is what made him dangerous. And it is what makes us remember him today. We owe it to all of them to remember that the movement was not simply MLK or Jesus making inspiring speeches, but disjointed and at times opposing groups who argued and got annoyed and experienced fatigue. To remember that movements are not smooth arc of progress, but happen in fits and starts with surges of progress and stultifying lulls. To remember and celebrate all of the ordinary, brave people who made room in their lives to participate in some way in the movement toward justice. Because the world continues to need us. It needs our varied groups focused on niche issues that we care about. It needs our discontent and our hashing out and our occasional bickering about the way forward. Most of all, the world needs our ordinary efforts. To remember that while movements can be inspired by profoundly gifted individuals, they are made up by people like us, making individual, ordinary choices that change the world. That in doing so, we join in that inescapable network of mutuality. So I urge us, I urge myself, let us peel back our cynicism and weariness, our sense of frustration at the lack of progress, our feeling of doom and paralysis. Let us open ourselves afresh to being inspired, to finding hope, to believing there is a way forward. And let us respond in love, in joy, with faithful action, to join in the inescapable mutual destiny that we share. Amen.